doesn't get more cringe than that. Hi, Zizaran here with another 3.13 Leaguestarter. This time we are going to be talking about Blast Chieftain, which is still insanely strong. I did that in the last Harvest League, and I basically stole Nugian's build and then built upon it and kept moving on it. And very, very strong. And it's going to be strong now again. Harvest is actually very, very big for this build, and we'll talk a little bit about that. If you're wondering what this build is for, it should be like very, very easy to play for beginners. The first 20 levels of your league start is a little bit rough, and we'll talk a little bit about that and make it easier. But extremely strong for bossing, decent clear speed, not like super zoomy like old assassin running around, but fairly decent clear speed, and you can see how well it clears here, especially with an explosion chest. So I want to show you guys how to play the build a little bit, and it changes like massively with just getting an explosion chest. So at the moment I'm showcasing it on a fairly geared character, but I'm using a tabula, so I don't have the explosion chest. And you see that Herald of Ash is actually doing a pretty decent amount, even in endgame maps, of helping with clear. It'll like look like this fairly easily in low maps. Getting it to like have your Herald of Ash do this much damage in high maps is pretty difficult. And you might feel that you'll have to use like Blade Fall quite a lot more. And then I can like show you the difference of changing to an actual explosion chest, which now with Harvest is very, very much more achievable, assuming they don't do any last minute changes on the tags. And now you'll see that we'll be able to just right click everything, and the entire pack will die, even in tier 14 maps. And I want to specifically show you guys what I do on bosses and like how to play the build. So one of the most important things is that you're basically instantly after blade falling doing the blade blast, because you actually start detonating more blades then, because they're detonating while they're still falling. So that's like a big part of why you actually do end up using a mana fast sometimes. Without a mana fast, you can sometimes end up playing like this, where you have to like wait a few seconds, and it's a very, very noticeable chunk of damage reduction. Now, but so you can drop the mana fast completely just by getting boot enchant sometimes. Here's an example of Val Righteous Fire in use as well. I'm going to be using it for the boss. And you can see that when I like play it like that, where I'm like instantly blade blasting after, you do such a crazy amount of damage. And then Val Righteous Fire, you do take like a chunk of HP loss. You never use the Righteous Fire version, but yeah, you take a set chunk of your life for a huge increase in spell damage. We can show it again here. You can see you lose like 30%, but obviously we have a lot of regen and stuff like that. Very, very nice to play. And again, if you're new to following my build guides, or you're getting an error in path of building, make sure you look at the video with instructions down below. We're using the community fork, and you need to have that as well. And as per normal, we do the skill tree, where, you know, it's a step-by-step to make sure it's easy for new players. Same with the ascendancy points are in here as well. Since the last time I played, Glancing Blow has got nerfed, so I no longer take it early game. I still very much want to take it once I get a life on block shield, but until then, we'll be skipping it. And you know, it probably is okay to skip endgame too. And the new defense mechanic to replace it, I'm basically going to be going for a soul tether. It's very, very easy for this build to get leech from our ascendancy. We'll talk more about that in the gearing section, but that is the major change from last time. The start for a Marauder is especially rough, and that is because, as you can see, it's only life and strength nodes in the start until you get up here to Divine Judgment. Another thing that makes this rough, and we can move over to the skills here, is, well, first of all, you need to do muling. Muling is, for example, in this case, I need to make a witch character, and you buy Purifying Flame, and you do the breaking some eggs quest to get Flame Wall. Once you have that, it's a lot easier, but you don't actually get a lot of gems that could have made this easier. So that's a bit of a pain. Everything else in here, I'm pretty sure I made sure that it's only gems that you get. If it is your second character or you have a friend, you can get, for example, Flame Dash instead. Dash can be a little bit annoying. Be careful about leveling that. Dexterity is something this build really struggles with in the start, and I want to point out some cases for new players of where you can get that. You definitely want to use a Jade Amulet, ideally at all times. Switching out of that is going to be very painful. And remember, you can craft stats on your crafting bench as well. We have here versatility for 2 points. We have 30 dex here. We have 20 dex here, and later on we're like up here. The more dexterity you're able to get on gear or through the crafting bench, the more skill points you're able to gain and drop from the skill tree. So that's pretty important. But basically, the leveling, you are using Purifying Flame, Holy Flame Totem, and Flame Wall. It's not the most enjoyable first 28 levels, and you can switch to Bladefall here once you are 28. It'll feel really, really nice once you're 38. A lot of people gave me feedback on last time. They were like, Ziz, you weren't lying. The first 38 levels weren't that fun. But oh my god, once I got 38, mwah. For the auras of the build, you're going to be using Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash early on. You can throw in Skitterbots as well. I find Skitterbots very clunky to use, at least until I get an Enduring Mana Flask. That's basically a Mana Flask that doesn't expire when your mana goes to full. Doing both the library and the 6 gem quests is going to be important for this build because you obviously don't get all of the normal caster supports. So you're going to have to get those from library and the Act 6 Lily quest. Here in the Endgame setup, I want to talk a little bit more about the build and explain things. But Blade Blast, one change here from the last time. I've stopped using Intensify and I'm using Ink AoE instead. That's because we never want the Intensify charges because that like reduces the AoE. Even though it gives more damage, it's the same principle for why Conkyfight is a really bad gem for the build. Because you want like, we can show in-game real quick, but we want the blades to have really, really large radius so that they do more overlap. Because the more overlap, the more damage. So even though it like might be hard to see in Path of Building, because it won't really like reflect it in your damage, the monsters that you're killing will get hit by more blades, therefore resulting in more damage. So Ink AoE is really, really good. Something that's important for the build, you want as much AoE on your Blade Blast as possible, and as little AoE on your Blade Fall as possible. So because of this, we actually want to keep Spell Cascade at level 1. That is like, I always forget that, to be honest, and usually somebody reminds me of it, but try to keep Spell Cascade at level 1. Another thing that can be really nice, if you can get a Elder Helmet with concentrated effect, that is really good as well. I really like playing Bladefall with faster casting early on as well, just because it might be less damage, but it can feel really good. So consider that. Other than that, late game, I have like Flame Dash, Enduring Cry, Second Wind, and Arcane Surge just to make the cooldown a little faster. We are using the instant Warcry, but yeah, you want it to just cast as often as possible. I've stopped using Immortal Call because since the last time we played, Enduring Cry has been nerfed and no longer like instantly generates 1 or 2 charges as easy. It's harder to generate charges, and we're a chieftain, so they do generate nicely. But I feel like there's too much downtime on your endurance charges, so I want to just keep them up. Until you have a trigger weapon, I would use Cast When Taken with Cold Snap and Wave of Conviction. Wave of Conviction just gives you exposure, and the Cold Snap gives like the chill effect and will start slowing them a bit, but also will give you frenzy charges. Once you get a trigger weapon from Betrayal, then you can have Wave of Conviction, Cold Snap, and Tempest Shield in here. Now, this caused quite a lot of confusion, especially since I had it in my own gem links with Cast and Image Taken. But with Val Righteous Fire, you never really want to use the normal Righteous Fire. I do have an example here of it working on a super endgame character, where I can actually out-regen it for a large damage boost, but most characters are just going to have very, very little fire resist, and they'll notice their HP will just be going down extremely quickly and they'll die. So never turn on the normal Righteous Fire, and instead, like we show in the How to Play the Build playthrough, use the Val Righteous Fire. It basically gives you a very, very nice chunk of 28% more spell damage to burst down bosses. It's very nice early. But if you're not comfortable with using that and taking a chunk of damage, just drop it. So you can use Flammability early on from level 24, but once you get a Curse on Hit Ring, you can drop self-cursing it. The only thing I would bother self-cursing is really, really tanky monsters such as map bosses. While talking about auras, if you're wondering why we are using skitterbots, it's because they are shocking and chilling the enemies. The shock making them take, at level 20, it's like 19 or 17% more damage. So it's very, very strong, pretty much for every build. The bandits for this build is skill point. You kill them all. We don't need any of the bandits here. And you can, on Leaguestarter, especially on hardcore, help a Lyra and then respec that later for 20 regrets. Resist can be a little bit of a pain, so there's nothing wrong with that. Pantheons, I would use Solaris and especially upgrade take no extra damage from Eater of Souls from critical strikes if you've taken a crit strike recently is huge. Definitely would recommend that. Shakari, when you upgrade that, is probably what I would use as a minor one. Abrath, if you do like start min-maxing and try running Purity Fire, is pretty nice. We've gone pretty hard on itemization and trying to make it easier to understand how to scale the build. So we have 4 trees here, and I'll walk you through them real quick. So early on, the first skills you have is like fire skills that would benefit from +1 fire skill gems. But ideally what you want is physical spell skill gems, because that's what's going to level your Blade Blast and Blade Fall, etc. Early on as well, I really like dual wielding. I actually really like dual wielding all the way into like tier 5 or 10 maps. So if you choose to do that, and I do recommend it, same with like using cast speed on Bladefall, it just feels so nice early. It just makes it so you're not as clunky. And then you can keep Dark Arts for longer, and you don't take the nodes that are when you're holding a shield. And then you can see early on, it's basically just going to be about getting life and resists on all your items. So just get resist wherever you can. Remember that you can use your crafting bench, and remember you're going to be losing resist at Act 5 and Act 10 Kitava. So just anywhere you can is important to get resist there. Getting a jewel with Onslaught so you can ditch a Onslaught Flask early is really nice on searching or murderous jewels. They are easier to roll on searching. The mid-game tree here, it's basically we're slapping on some fire damage. Spell damage does work too, but fire damage will also scale, for example, your Herald of Ash damage over time. It is nicer. And later, when you have an explosion test, fire or physical damage will scale your explosion. Percentage physical damage on a Driftwood one like this wouldn't affect your skill in any way ever, because it only affects attacks with this skill. Moving on further, like just more life and resists, and here we can try picking up a incursion armor. These are basically chests that you find either from incursion. Sometimes when you see the armor reward from other leagues, it'll give it to you. When you hold alt on an item like this, it'll show you that it's got Guatzalitzis, which is percentage life and maximum life. So on top of this, I could actually craft percentage life, which you can unveil later from Betrayal. Very, very strong in the mid game. So for your ring, you want to try to get a early flammability ring. The easiest place to get this is in Delve. It'll look like this, and it'll say contains fire items. It's not guaranteed that you get them, and most of the time they're going to be pretty bad. This would actually be a good one. It actually has a life roll, but even if you get like a power ring with just like shit stats but flammability, that could be worth using as well, even if it's hard to fit. And then, you know, dexterity on your ring and amulet is really, really nice to get as well. And trying to get a soul tether. Soul tether is pretty easy to make working for this build because we have fire damage leech in our ascendancy. A lot of builds can struggle to get leech, especially for spells, but it's so easy for our build here. A quick TLDR of how this works: it will give you the Slayer Overleech node because Immortal Ambition makes it that your life leech goes to energy shield leech whenever you're full. This means that it's actually useful even if you have only 30 energy shield, just means that you're constantly leeching, and it's a very, very good defense. But it makes it even more valuable if you're able to get like life as extra energy shield, for example, which is a craft you can get on a chest. As a new thing that we're going to try to do for all builds, we've put all the useful jewel stats I could think of in a jewel. So if you've like watched any of my Path of Exile University stuff where I talk about how to search for all the jewel stats you need, we put them all here, and we're gonna include a search in the notes for how to search for all of these. And then you just have to switch it to the league you're playing. Endgame, trying to like make it more clear what people are gonna like go for here. Fire damage, fist spell skills, cast speed, and here we have a trigger scepter. Here you want to get a life on block shield, and this is when I would start going for block cluster jewels with block, which the ones I have here. See here, I have spell block, spell block. The spell damage we don't care that much about. It should be worth it once you have a life on block shield, because you're getting like a large amount of life back. Here's another example. You want to start thinking about ailment immunity is another option, but even just having a helmet with conk effect so that you get the blades of the blade fall will be closer together. Helmet enchant, the blade blast AoE, really, really nice. Any enchant's good if you can get something, but this is probably the one I would want to go for. And let's talk a little bit about ailment immunity. Ailment immunity basically means that you don't need immune to freezing, immune to shock, immune to ignite, etc. on your flasks, and it frees up a lot of slots. That means you just need immunity to corrupting blood or a bleed immunity. You can get that either by corrupting jewels to get corrupting blood immunity, which still leaves you at risk from bosses with high bleeds, but it frees up a lot of your slots. Super, super important for this build. Explosion chest just feels really nice, even if it's the only stat on the chest, worth doing. Here we've crafted avoid ailments on your boots. This is the shaper boots with the tier 1 avoid ailments, which I think is item level 81 or 83, I can't remember. 35% avoid ailments. So once you get 100%, and this actually includes my Anoint has arcane swiftness, then yeah, you are completely immune to being frozen, etc. Very, very strong and worth thinking about. Amulet, we have just high life. Fist is extra fire damage. It goes all the way up to 15%. And +1 level of all physical skill gems is really nice. Dex, obviously, really, really important for this build. And it can actually be nice to use the intrinsic catalysts to get a little bit more dexterity out of something like this, especially if you have multiple. Like here we have Dex implicit and crafted. Here is a flammability ring. That's a lot nicer, more like what you would want it to look like. The fist doesn't do anything. It's just you're not likely to get perfect on these items. And we are showing some perfect items in the super endgame. This is really, really nice. You could throw an aura in here as well. What I was using this for in my build, I had like purity of fire here just to get 2 more levels. And aspect of the spider, really, really nice. Aspect of the spider, you want to make sure you don't put on like a helmet or a chest or something, because it is affected by support gems. And rings like this is what I would use Essence of Hysteria on for this build. It gives you the fist's extra fire damage stat, so it's very strong. And if you find, for example, a fractured item, maybe find a fractured ring that is like 65 life. Fractured means that you can use essences, chaos, etc. on the ring, and that stat will stay there forever, which is what I did here. And Soul Tether, again, endgame. I'm not gonna like go over all the super endgame items. These are basically an example of what I had on my super endgame character. These are a lot more achievable this league because we have Harvest. So if you're like, you love this character and you really want to grind into it, this is some of the super endgame stuff that I had on my character as an example. Here you can see we're now using Forbidden Taste. I would start using this when you have 7k life and you don't need an immunity. Normally, early on, I will be using freeze immunity on my flask. And flasks are super important, and so is immunities. Make sure that you always want bleed immunity, freeze immunity, then curse immunity, then like shock immunity, which is less important for softcore. Enduring Mana Flask, this is droppable by getting like the 70% Uberlab Mana Recovery Boot Enchant. It's like Mana Recovery if you've cast a spell recently. It is okay to drop, but it requires an investment. You might even need like 50% mana regen on a jewel, and it can be pretty hard. And something like mana cost reduction isn't that big for this build. Cinder Swallow, really, really good on this build. It just feels really nice while clearing. It's regenerating your mana, regenerating your life. I went with the critical strike chance one. This is to keep proccing elemental overload, just to have more uptime on it, because we don't have very high crit. You want to have like somewhere like 7 to 10% to keep it up a decent amount. Wise Oak, this is really, really nice. The only thing that's very important here is that it is a damage buff pretty much always for this character, because you're most likely going to open up your resists and see like 200 or 150 fire or something. It's actually very hard to balance it on this build. But worst case scenario, you can do what I did, which is, you know, 98 here. So we're penetrating fire resist, and I take less cold and lightning resist. So that's pretty cool. And then just a normal Quicksilver of Adrenaline. You can use Chemist if you feel like Alchemist expires too fast. Another endgame thing, Thread of Hope. It's really, really nice just to pick up these with you're saving a bunch of points here, and you're also getting Arcane Capacitor, and we can keep Arcane Surge up just with Flame Dash. So it is pretty nice. You also get Sanctum of Thought for hardcore, which is huge because crits is one of the things that kill you the most. Before we end, let's talk a little bit about Annoints for the build. Diamond skin, super good early on. Very, very cheap. Arcane Swiftness is fairly cheap and very good and helps it make easier for your character to get ailment immune. When you are like max blocked, and if you're on softcore and you don't care that much about ailment immune, survival isn't your main focus, then Command of Steel is basically 75% increased damage once you have 75% block. So the normal questions we have at build guides at the end, are there too many gems to equip? There shouldn't be. One of the easier things you can drop is like increased duration on Steel Skin, and even like your entire cast on damage taken setup isn't that important and would be one of the least prioritized things. And unset rings could be nice if you feel like you're running out of gems, but you shouldn't be. Can the player have mana issues? Well, yes, 100%. You will end up using a mana flask for the majority of players. It's a bit of a struggle to get rid of, but an enduring mana flask will make sure you have a high DPS uptime. And even with an enduring mana flask, for longer boss fights, having mana recovery rate gear, so like 50% increased mana regeneration and getting the mana boot enchant can be really, really nice. Useful leveling uniques for this build is going to be your normal standard stuff. +1 physical spell skill gems wands is really nice. Darkness Enthroned with like jewels with some extra fire damage early on. Barracks Respite or like the Barracks Grip, Barracks. All the Barrack rings are really, really good for leveling spell builds early on. And there's just your normal stuff like Tabula, etc. Talking about like sustain and quality of life options, Chieftain did get a little bit of a loss to its regen. You lose 2% regen. However, you have a decent amount of regen in general, and you have like endurance charges. Your leeching should be very, very nice to play. And then your primary and secondary defense. Endgame, you are basically, you have the life on block shield with recovery there, and you also have like soul tether with the Slayer overleech basically. So it should be really, really good for bosses. You have a bunch of endurance charges. You have okay resists, and it should feel really good to play and be an insanely strong build. For auras, it's pretty hard to fit auras. We don't really need anger because it's just a bit of flat added fire. So we don't care that much about that. Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, and Skitterbots are really good. And then the aspect of the Spider aura would be another one that's really good as well. Drawback-wise to this build, the biggest drawback is it is more of a boss killer, so it is a little bit slow. It's not a super zoomy bow build that's running around speed clearing maps. And another downside is you do have two abilities with you are using Bladefall and Blade Blast. It's not just the right click ability. And for the biggest financial hurdles for this build, probably the biggest thing is going to be the explosion chest. They're very easy to craft, but even getting an item level 85 Crusader explosion chest can be pretty hard. It's a fairly, at the end of the day, it's a fairly strong and decent build. Good for SSF, good for Trade League. I've played it a lot and it's been one of my favorite builds to play. You can do Uber Elder, hopefully Maven, and everything on this build. Hope you guys are enjoying it. If I forgot something or you feel like something wasn't accurate, feel free to post it in comments down below and help other players out. Good luck in 3.13. I hope the build guide helps. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you like the video, and try to die less than I do.